Hello, I'm Tristan Miller, and you're listening to Positive and Negative, a podcast about the intersectionality between mental health and the arts. Today on the program, we have actor, writer, musician, and motion capture pioneer, Ahmed Best. He speaks about his experience with depression and how other people's opinions can impact your mental health. Here he is talking about the stigma of dealing with depression.
We talk about it in this very tertiary, it could never happen to me, almost patronizing way. And that's unfair. It's unfair to the person, and it's unfair to the situation the person is going through. And I think we need to start having this conversation in a real way that doesn't stigmatize it, you know? Because there's been a point in everyone's life where they felt like they weren't enough, where they felt like they were useless. Everybody has thought this. Like, what am I even doing here? You know? Some people can go through that thought. You know? Some people can just go, what am I doing here? Fuck it, and move on.
Yeah.
Some people can't. You know,
yeah.
Some people can't, and they're brought to extremes. And I was brought to an extreme, and I had my wake up moment in that extreme, which helped me continue. But to be there at the point, at the time, going, you know what, this is it.
This podcast is made possible by your support over at patreon.com. You can go to patreon.com/Tristan J. Miller to support us there. You receive exclusive content for both this and 2 other podcasts, as well as a very nice thank you note from me. You can follow us at Twitter at PauseAndNegPod if you want to communicate about this episode or any of the other episodes we have available to you. Alright, let's get to this interview. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
You're from this city, right?
From New York City, yeah.
Yeah. You live here. And you were growing up, I would imagine, in the 80s. What was that like? Yeah,
you know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in New York City. And it was great. It was dangerous. It's a lot different now than it was back then. But New York was this really interesting place of just a lot of diversity. A lot of people were coming to New York to try to find it, you know what I mean, to try to find their art, to try to find their identity, and it was affordable back then to do that. And I remember my mom is an artist, and my mom had a studio with a bunch of people that she went to college with. My mom went to FIT, and she had a studio in Soho. And Soho was like just heroin addicts and graffiti. It was just awful.
Yeah.
But they had these like enormous loft spaces where artists would just gather and you know, form these collectives and make stuff. And so I remember being a kid on the streets of Soho, like jumping over heroin addicts, but being in these like beautiful loft spaces where a lot of art was happening. And I didn't know anything from anything, but you know, Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat and like all of those guys were around that neighborhood at those times. And so, you know, we would see them on the street every once in a while, like especially Basquiat, like when Basquiat was just getting his shine. You know, we would like, it would be like Basquiat sightings, and I didn't know who Basquiat was, but you know, all the artists who my mom knew and my father knew, they were just like, oh, there's Basquiat, and then he would like disappear. You know, and then much later when I was an adult, I was like, oh, that's who Keith Haring is. Oh, that's who Andy Warhol is. Oh, that's Basquiat. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of that time in New York, growing up as a kid, like, you don't know who these people are. Yeah. But it was crazy. New York was crazy. And, you know, New York still has this you can still find your niche, right? And you can still find that corner of yourself. Like, New York is still this place where people are like, look, you're doing something, keep doing it. You know, you can be weird and like people will be like, look, that shit was weird, but keep doing it. There's something in there. There's a you.
Yeah. So art was always around growing up then?
Always.
With you?
Always. Yeah. Art, music. Everybody in my family is either an artist or an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And you were in a band for a while, right? You recorded a couple albums.
Yeah. Music is my first love. And I went to Manhattan School of Music, and then I was in a bunch of bands. But yeah, I recorded a couple records on Atlantic Records, and you know, I was a rapper for a minute.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Why the switch over to acting then?
I'd always done both at the same time, and music kind of was taking off a little bit faster than the acting was. And there were just a lot of opportunities in the 90s to make music. You know, there were a lot of independent record labels popping up, and you know, most of my friends were musicians, so you know, we had time, we were broke, and we would just put together bands and we would play. And then, you know, the 90s, there was so much money around that people were getting signed left and right. And so one of the bands I was with called the Jazz Hole got signed. And so that's when I jumped headfirst into the music business. But, you know, getting a record deal isn't Shangri-La. Like, once you get a record deal, you realize how the business works, and it's very difficult to like keep a record deal. And then, you know, we were on a small label, which was a subsidized label of Atlantic Records, and the president of our label embezzled all the Atlantic Records money and disappeared. And we were just like, oh my God, like how we had no tour support. We had, you know, no money in the bank to do anything. There were a lot of people in the band. So Big Atlantic took us on, but we couldn't survive. It was just like us and like Genesis. You know what I mean? And they were like focused more on those guys than they were us.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's rough, man. That's rough.
Yeah, it was tough.
And you do a podcast now that I listen to called Afrofuturist Podcast.
Yeah, the Afrofuturist Podcast, I started maybe about 2.5 years ago. And it was right at this point where Afrofuturism was reaching really the mainstream media as far as attention goes. Like, people don't really understand Afrofuturism yet, but when the Black Panther movie came out, everybody was like, oh yeah, Afrofuturism, you know? But it's been around for quite a long time, Afrofuturism. And, you know, if you have read any of the Octavia Butler books, or if you're a fan of just this idea that the ancient civilizations in Africa had all of this information and all of this acumen and all of this expertise, and then, you know, Europeans from, you know, the Roman Empire and Greece, they would travel to Africa, get all of this information, and bring it back up north, right? As well as Africans going into Europe and either like starting wars and conquering or intermingling with Europeans, you know, the Moors and the Nubians, you know, in Spain and in Italy. They influenced a lot of culture in Europe, and Europeans took on that culture and then, you know, amalgamated it into their societies. But most of the sciences and most of the technologies started in ancient Africa and in these ancient civilizations. Civilizations like Egypt, civilizations like the Malian Empire, the Benin Empire, the Abyssinian Empire, and you know, metallurgy, mathematics, astronomy, all of these things started in Africa. So what Afrofuturism is an ancestral look back to where speculative fiction and science fiction kind of began and branch out from there, right? So it's this idea that the futurist movement in the 20s in Italy and in Europe, that wasn't really the first futurist movement. And we tend to think that futurism began there, right? Like in Europe with the Italians, and then boom, World's Fair, and then flying cars, and then Jetsons. Right? But it's a much older tradition. And that's what Afrofuturism really kind of talks about.
Yeah, it's really good. It's an excellent podcast. I think you do a very good job with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You clearly have like an interest in technology and speculative fiction. And when you were working on Star Wars, were you very excited about the new technology you were working with?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I didn't really know what was going to happen until I got to my screen test, right? And then at the screen test, that's when I put on what's now commonly known as a motion capture suit, and it had the optical, infrared optical trackers on it and everything. And then I was looking at this stuff, and at the time, this was like 1997, so computers were still like measured in depth. Right?
Yep.
Like now it's just screen size is 16 inches. No, these computers were like 10 feet deep.
Yeah.
So I would see all of these just like computers, just like the hard drives piled in like these deep screens. And I was like, what is going on? And it looked like a bunch of like, Silicon Valley, rocket scientists behind this thing. And when I finally saw what's, now called a point cloud, which is where all the trackers on the suit are extrapolated and put into the computer simulation. When I saw that, and I saw these dots on the screen move like me, that's when I realized, this is going to be something special. Like this is something really, really special. And I was in. I loved it. I've always been a fan of science, and I always loved computers. I was into computers since I was a very small, since the Commodore 64. So I always had technology and art as my thing. Even in high school, I was very big with computer music and programming songs and programming beats. And, I was working on Macs and Apple since Apple started. So I had always been kind of close to it. And this, Jar Jar was like perfect for me. You were kind of like discovered because you were in Stomp, and then you got the offer, right? Yeah.
And you weren't like represented by any agency. How did that feel as like a young person?
Very scary. It was very scary. Yeah. I was just thrust into this like giant world, and I just didn't know how to navigate it. And thankfully, I had people in my life who could be like, okay, go here, go there. But it's a difficult time because everybody wants a piece of it. So you don't know who to trust or, when to trust them. So I really leaned heavily on, a lot of my relationships in the music industry. I had friends who were managers and lawyers in the music industry, and they helped me hammer out whatever deal I could get at the time, which wasn't great because I was, brand new. I was unknown. Nobody, I was a kid, and the technology was new. The process was new. I think no one but George Lucas really knew how just history changing it was going to be. But I didn't really have a leg to stand on. You know what I mean? I was just so brand new. I assume you were a fan of Star Wars growing up, being a fan of technology and art. And yeah. It was the first movie I saw. Yeah. So I would assume you were very, very excited about it. I was over the moon. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was one of those like life-changing things that almost never happens to anyone, And here I am, plucked pretty much off the Stomp stage, smack dab into this brand new world, brand new universe, and I just was like, at the biggest stage, in movies, especially at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, it seems also like you were never discouraged from pursuing art. Were your parents like really supportive of you the whole time?
Yeah,
because they're both artists. You said.
Yeah, because they're artists, they didn't really want me to have an artist's life because they know how tough it is, And my father's a cinematographer, but he had 3 kids, so he moved into TV. So he was a cameraman for ABC for all his career pretty much. So even though it was an art profession, there was an incredible amount of stability to his job, and that's what he wanted. He wanted us to have stability, and me and my brother and my sister, we all decided to be artists, and we decided not to have that stability at all. So,
sure.
My parents were just like, yeah, you guys can go and do your thing and express yourself. But they were worried, just like any parent would be when you decide to take on a profession that's difficult. So, they were supportive to an extent. There were a couple of instances where they were just like, you don't want to be a lawyer? And I was like, yeah, nah. It's not for me.
Yeah. And you do a lot of different creative, like, where do you think that comes from, that ability to do music and do acting and playing with like the computers and stuff like?
Yeah, well, I think it's a couple of things. One, I'm just a curious person. Mm-hmm. I like learning, and I like finding out about things, and I like seeing how things work, and I like seeing how people do their stuff, So every time I see something that's interesting, I'm drawn to it. I'm just like, how do you do that? What is that? What is that about? Mm-hmm. And, I've always been a deconstructor, and I like finding complex things and breaking them down to its simplest form in a way that I can understand it. So whenever I'm faced with something that appears to be complex, I always ask myself, why is it so tough? Why is it so complex? And can I make this easier? Can I make it so I understand it? I approach everything like that. So with music, for me, it was about what are the building blocks to music? Like, how does music work? And once I figured out how music worked, then all the other stuff is just like muscle memory. Instruments are just muscle memory. I know what a scale does. I know where chord progressions go. You know what I mean? And I know what these notes are. Now that I know all of that stuff, now I just got to work the muscles, And same thing with the computers, same thing with programming and coding. It's like, here is a thing that I want to do. Here is a block of code that does that thing. Let me just do that. You know what I'm saying? And I try I try not to think too hard about it because, we tend to overanalyze.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you find yourself like an overanalytic person and kind of like a heady person that way?
My wife does. I quite like thinking. I think a lot. I think a lot. I think often. There are a lot of times where I'm just sitting by myself just thinking and I look weird. But I don't overanalyze to the point of not making sense, right? I don't look for an analysis that sparks more hypothesis. I usually try to analyze till I get to the thing, till I get to the core of the thing. And once I think I got it, I'll hold on to the theory until it's changed or until I change it.
So it's not like you don't feel anxious when you're overanalyzing anything.
No, I just feel, it's kind of along the deconstructor line of things, I feel like I'm just pulling away the layers, I'm pulling away the facade to get to the true intentions, That's what I think being an artist and being an actor and being a director and a writer is. It's like, all right, what's the real reason why we're doing this thing? Why do we behave this way?
Yeah.
Really? And then if you're a writer, you can find that core behavior and then just start putting masks over it, right? And you do that for every character. You find the character, you find that intention, you find the reason why they're doing all of this stuff emotionally, like what happened to them, and then you start putting masks over it, and that's where you find your story, and then the story is really about revealing, taking away those layers, taking away those masks until you get to that one part in your story where it's just like, oh, this is it, this is the core, and that's what makes it exciting.
How'd you approach that with Jar Jar, who's like an alien, and like, I mean, he's very human because you're a human's playing him, but like, how did you go about that?
With Jar Jar, I found who I was in the character, what my core belief was in this world with these people. And for me, the reason why Jar Jar did everything he did was his core belief was, I will never let you down. I'm not the smartest, I'm not the strongest, I'm not the fastest, I'm not a Jedi, I don't have any of this stuff. But if you ask me to do a thing, I am going to do that thing. And I'm not going to let you down. I will not let you down. So that's the thing that drove the character for me, which is why, when it's just like General Binks at the end of the movie, Jar Jar didn't know anything about being a general, about being in a war, or fighting battles or anything, but he was like, look, my people need me and I'm not going to let you down. So it seems it's very actory, that kind of thinking, but it helped me, and it defined my actions and defined my character in the movie, and it was good because it's almost childlike, that idea, you don't want to disappoint your parents, you want them to think the best of you, you know what I mean? And the hardest thing about being a kid is you're trapped in this little body and you're just trying to do your best, and you have all of these big people and all of these adults who claim they know more than you telling you to do things, and you're just like, I don't get it. Like, all I want to do is do my best, and I don't want to disappoint my parents. So it was easier for me to get into the child body of Jar Jar, thinking I don't want to disappoint you,
Yeah. And do you think that was like a metatextual thing with being on this huge project of like not wanting to disappoint George Lucas?
Absolutely. I mean, people from where I'm from, I'm from the South Bronx, like these opportunities like this, the way it happened to me, doesn't come along, a lot. So I J-Lo is from up the block from me. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, it's me and J-Lo from the Bronx, and Cardi B, maybe. But opportunities like this don't come around too much, and I was really trying not to get fired, like straight up. I was trying not to get fired. So when these opportunities present themselves, I was gonna do my best, and I was gonna throw myself into this thing, as much and as hard as I possibly could, and I wasn't gonna ask too many questions. I was going to enjoy the process, keep an open mind and learn. And if I had a suggestion, I would make that suggestion and, have George steer the ship. Like, that's his job. Those movies are his vision. It's his words. And my job as an actor in the movies was to make his vision real and to give everything that he needed for his vision and leave it all out there, on the screen. And if I felt I could enhance his vision in a way that he wasn't seeing because he didn't know me, I felt like I'm going to do that. And, he was so open to the collaboration and so generous with his time. Like he was amazing.
Did that make it harder when the audience response happened?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part about it was we did a lot of great work. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if you watch The Phantom Menace, every technique in movie history till now is in that movie. Mm-hmm. Every single one.
Yeah.
And, the ubiquity of CGI in movies did not exist before Phantom Menace. An actor playing a CGI character, a main character, didn't exist before the Phantom Menace. So we were using technical as well as computer generated film techniques, creating a brand new industry in film in that movie. And we kind of all knew it, and we were in this bubble watching all of this happen, going, wow, we're doing something that's never been done before. And everybody talks about doing something that's never been done before. So when the audience response came out and it wasn't favorable, all of us were kind of shell-shocked. We were taken aback by it, because we were in the bubble doing the work.
How does it feel now, knowing that there's a whole younger generation that I'm a part of, that the reaction was the one that was intended? Does that soften the blow?
Kind of. George knew that. He was like, 20 years from now, this is going to be different, and it's because he went through it before. He knew that was going to happen. It took me a while to actually believe that opinions have changed. And when I went to Star Wars Celebration earlier this year, that was the thing that kind of changed my mind about it. And all of those kids who loved Jar Jar when they were kids are now adults, 20 years later.
Yeah.
And they have a very close connection to him because they identified with him being a kid. You know? And it's just you have all these people who know all this stuff about you, and they're telling you to do things. And kids, they saw that, and they saw that wonder of Jar Jar. So now that they're adults, they were, I get a lot of response I felt like that was me as a kid. And I was like, oh, man, I felt like that was me as a kid, too. So it does soften the blow. It does. Industry-wise, we haven't gotten there yet.
Sure.
Industry-wise, we don't recognize the contribution of the Phantom Menace to movie history enough. Yeah. It's still looked on as some kind of a failure, which I don't understand.
In the interim between the 2 points, between the last 20 years, you've been facing a lot of flack. And how did that start manifesting, and how did that impact your life on a day-to-day?
It impacted it tremendously, and right now I'm writing a one-man show about this because a lot of times everyone thinks that you can just say things to people and it won't affect them for some reason. You know what I mean? For some reason, people are just they don't see what they're saying as detrimental because they don't ever have to meet me. You know what I mean? They don't have to deal with me on a daily basis. It's easy to fire out a very hateful, social media post on pick your medium and never have to actually deal with the person face to face.
Yeah.
So nobody really knew how damaging that was to me emotionally, you know, to how I felt to my psyche, you know, and they didn't see, you know, the self-confidence and you know, all of that stuff just like almost disappeared, you know. I really started doubting myself. I really started doubting my ability to actually do this work. And all the things that I've learned that brought me to that place, it just seemed to just go away, you know? And it took me a while to realize that, you know, I'm actually really good at what I do. You know, I'm good at my job. I do my job, and I did my job well, especially in Star Wars. Like, I did my job. I did the job that I was asked to do. And no one really understands the filmmaking process in depth. You know, I remember having a conversation with Liam Neeson, and he was talking about Schindler's List. And, you know, that last scene in Schindler's List where he breaks down. And, you know, the critics had a field day with Liam Neeson over that joint, you know. They had a field day. They were like, Schindler's List was great, but that one scene. And Liam was just like, what the fuck? He was like, why is everybody blaming me for this scene? It's like, Steven Spielberg is the director. This is the scene. This is the take he chose. You know, and everybody's like, oh, Liam Neeson sucked in that last scene. You know what I'm saying? He's like, I didn't fucking, I didn't do that, you know? So people don't understand, people understand the process. You know, film is a director's medium, and the director gets to choose what goes on the screen. But people go after the actors, and it's a bit unfair. You know, it's a bit unfair.
When you were dealing with that, did you like go through any therapy, or were you just cruising through?
No, you know, I should have. I should have. Sure. But you know, when you're in it, stuff like that you just don't really think about, and you know, it's very easy to dismiss the fact that you don't think about it. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's like, well, how can you not think about it? You're depressed. Go get therapy. And it's like, you know what? It's difficult to even recognize the fact that you have depression. You know what I mean? Like, it's not easy. It's not easy to even accept the fact, like, you wake up one day and you're like, and it's usually afterwards, you know, you're just like, oh, snap. Yeah. I was really in it, you know? I was really depressed. So in the moment, when you're like, go get therapy, you're like, you don't believe that you're in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Had you ever dealt with any of that kind of emotions before in your life?
You know, not to that extent, no. I had always been, and you know, also, I have to say, not that I could recognize, because it probably is the case. But unfortunately, in a lot of the black community in America, we're not encouraged to seek therapy in popular culture, right? It's changing now. You know, it's changing now. Now therapy is a lot more acceptable. And I think black people specifically should seek therapy. There is a lot of stuff that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis just being here. And, you know, the fact that racism and discrimination, we are always navigating racism and discrimination on a daily basis. And that shit is heavy, you know. But there's a bit of the culture that just says, you know, suck it up, be a man, and go through the next day. You know what I mean? There's this idea that, you know, your ancestors survived slavery and you sad because you in a movie. Get over it. You know what I mean? Yeah. But, you know, honestly, there levels, and it's all relative. You know what I mean? So a lot of the times, that's what I told myself. A lot of times I was just like, you know what, suck it up. It's a movie. But that's really a dangerous thing to do. It's a dangerous thing to tell yourself, because that feeling, that sadness, that depression, that's a real circumstance regardless of where it came from. You know? So you do have to deal with that.
You got to a point where you considered jumping off a bridge, right?
Yeah, and I hadn't talked about this for a very, very long time, and it's still difficult to talk about. But I feel like I have to start talking about this now, because it happens to more people than we know. And since I started speaking about this, since I started telling this story, I've gotten a lot of people who pull me aside and very quietly go, yeah, it happened to me too. And it's more people than I could have ever thought. And there's this idea that because you have what appears to be a fortunate life, there is nothing for you to want to do this for, right?
Yeah.
What really struck me hard was when Anthony Bourdain committed suicide.
Yeah.
And that's what really made me start talking about this, because Bourdain committed suicide, and I loved Anthony Bourdain. You know, I loved his book, Kitchen Confidential. I loved his show. I love the fact that he was culturally communicating and sharing all of this stuff with the world through his art. And I was just a really, really huge fan. And then when he committed suicide, I was like, everybody was saying, how could he do it? I don't understand. He had everything. He was traveling around the world. He was eating great food. What is your problem? And I thought to myself, I know how he could have.
Yeah.
I know exactly how he could have. And I just felt like we hear this stuff, and you know, we talk about it in this very like tertiary, it could never happen to me, almost patronizing way. And that's unfair. It's unfair to the person, and it's unfair to the situation the person is going through. And I think we need to start having this conversation in a real way that doesn't stigmatize it, you know? Because there's been a point in everyone's life where they felt like they weren't enough, where they felt like they were useless. Everybody has thought this. Like, what am I even doing here? You know? Some people can go through that thought. You know? Some people can just go, what am I doing here? Fuck it, and move on.
Yeah.
Some people can't. You know?
Yeah.
Some people can't, and they're brought to extremes. And I was brought to an extreme, and I had my wake-up moment in that extreme, which helped me continue. But to be there at the point, at the time, going, you know what, this is it. That's to get to that place emotionally, you know, is a very tough place to get to. And there's a lot of stuff going on that needs to be addressed and needs to be talked about. And when you get there, you feel alone. That's really the reason why you're doing it, because you feel all alone. You feel like and nobody will be able to understand you. You know, the fact that, man, you're in a big movie, what you're so sad about, is one of the things that pushes you to feel alone, right? Because then you start spinning in your head and you start believing that, you know? And then you're like, well, nobody's going to get it. So, and I'm almost positive that that's what Anthony Bourdain was thinking, you know? He was probably like, nobody's going to really accept the fact that I'm feeling this way because I'm Anthony Bourdain, and I started doing jujitsu, and I have this book, and I'm famous. And he's just like, fuck it. I don't need anybody. You know what I mean? I'm alone anyway.
Yeah.
You know? So I think, as far as that, everyone is starting to talk about wellness. What is wellness?
Yeah.
And wellness is not a state of being, in my opinion. I think wellness is the ability to have this conversation and be open and honest and vulnerable and talk to people who have empathy for this position and really find a way to, in your bones, make them feel like they're not alone.
How did you recover from that? You seem to be doing better, which I'm glad for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge that doesn't really go away completely. It's always there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I tell you, a big part of it was my son. Having my son and knowing that he's so very vital and important to me, and he gives me something to fight for. He gives me something to fight for every day, and I'll never leave him. So that's a wonderful anchor, and imagining never having my son was one of the reasons I had to step off the bridge and move on, because I've always wanted to have a son like I have, So that is just so incredibly valuable to me, and I would never ever try to trade that value. It's too much. It means too much.
Yeah. Do you do anything now to actively, you mentioned you don't really do therapy, but do you do anything else now actively to
I do
kind
therapy.
of dissuade? Oh, you do it now? Okay, great.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. I do therapy. I talk to a lot of people who have shared similar experiences. I've always been a martial artist. I've always believed in martial arts. It's the closest thing I have to religion, and that helps me a lot. Martial arts is really, that's the bulk of my therapy, martial arts. But yeah, I'm done with the stigma of I have to look like I have it all together. I'm kind of done with that. Yeah. I don't think any human being does. I don't even know what that means, got it all together. You know what I mean? Everybody needs help. You know what I'm saying? And I think this idea that, and I think it's very American, this idea that all you need to do is lock yourself in a room with a typewriter, and in 10 months you have the perfect novel. That is 100% bullshit. Nobody does this alone. Nobody does anything alone. No one. I don't care how popular or famous or intelligent you are. You have a bunch of people helping you out. There's this book that's coming out called We Are Stephen Hawking, right? And I don't think it's out. It might be out. But there's this book coming out called We Are Stephen Hawking, right? And it talks about the team behind Stephen Hawking. We think about Stephen Hawking as this lone physicist in his chair, thinking about other worlds and other dimensions. And he is. But he also has a team of people surrounding him that he can go, hey, how about this idea? And then they go figure it out. Yeah. And then they come back to him and they go, Stephen, what do you think? And he goes, well, this is, what I think. And then they go away and they figure it out again. There's all of these people behind the machine of Stephen Hawking. And, unfortunately, what we do as a society is we put the guy up there. It's this guy is the smartest guy to ever be a guy. And, you know what I'm saying? We think about all this shit like that. He doesn't do it alone, Yeah. And so a lot of the times, we as, mortal men and women, we go, well, we have to get through this alone. Nobody gets through it alone. No one. We need each other. We're human beings. We're herd animals. We're pack animals. We need a pack. You know? Nobody does this shit alone.
Yeah. How's your experience been with therapy, if you don't mind me asking?
You have to find the right person.
Yeah.
Because it's been, up and down, hot and cold. Some people I agree with, some people I don't. But you have to find the right person. And, it's generally been positive. Anytime you can sit and talk about how you feel with somebody who is just willing to listen is great.
Yeah.
It's really good to just have that somebody who is impartial, that is not someone you're romantically involved with.
That helps a lot.
And that doesn't know your little idiosyncrasies on how you can hide your true feelings. Anytime you get to do that, it's positive. It's positive. So, I've always liked it. I've always dug it.
Yeah. Have you ever done any medication to counteract?
No, I haven't.
No?
Thankfully, I have never gotten to that point where I've needed medication.
Sure.
I am not knocking medication at all. If you have a chemical imbalance in your brain and you need the medication to rebalance your brain, do it. Do it. It's important to do. I've always found, and this is going to sound a bit new agey, but I've always been a meditator.
Yeah, I do it every day.
Yeah, I've been a meditator since I was a kid, because of the martial arts thing. I was about to be a ninja. Yeah. I would always watch these ninja movies, and these ninjas would just sit in like silence, and I always did that. I was like, "Oh, ninja, sit in silence." And I liked it. Yeah. So when I feel that imbalance, I really just sit and breathe and meditate, and it definitely gets me back.
What would your biggest piece of advice be for someone who's also going through like a similar situation?
My biggest piece of advice would be, you're not alone. You're not alone. You're actually the opposite of alone. There are a lot of people who are there for you. And I would say, even if you don't think you're in that position, reach out. Like, reach out to somebody. If you feel like, oh, that's not me, I don't need that, I'm just, a little bit gloomy right now, you're in it.
Yeah.
You're in it. And I would say to the people who are close to that person, reach out to them. Don't wait. Don't wait. If you feel as if this person that you care about is in depression, reach out. And don't go, look, man, you're depressed. That's not a good way to approach it.
Yeah.
Just reach out to them, sit with them, and just listen to them. Just listen. And don't judge, and don't talk, and don't say, if it was me, or that, enough of all of that. Just listen to them. That's all they need. They just need somebody to listen.
How's the one-man show coming? How's that process been like?
It's really good. It's really good.
Yeah.
It's going to be on stage by next summer for sure.
Amazing.
And I have some of the best human beings in my life. And I have to say that I have been extremely fortunate to have worked with and befriended some fantastic, empathetic, way smarter than me human beings that I could call on and ask for help, and they come. And I'm I just did a reading last night for a bunch of very close friends who I trust, and who will be honest and tear me apart.
Yeah.
And that's why I did it for them. And I was nervous, and I was, you know, I was afraid of what they were going to think of me and all of that stuff. And I did the reading, and they gave me some of the best, you know, honest feedback I've ever had in anything I've done. And, you know, I really am a fortunate person to be here and to be able to tell this story and to be able to share it with those people who lived with me through that experience and are able to take this on and be humble enough to share their professional opinions with me and help me get better, help me really get better. So it's been such a wonderful experience writing it. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It doesn't get easy.
That sounds difficult.
It doesn't get easier. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, telling the story is hard. Like, it's really, really hard. But I really have to say, in my life, and it's taken me, 25 years to be able to say this, I am a very fortunate person to have the people in my life that I have. And I'm not taking that for granted at all. And if it wasn't for me going through what I went through with the prequels, I wouldn't be able to really see how fortunate I am now.
Do you find when you're writing it that you start to fall back to that place emotionally?
I can still feel what it feels like. And I think as an actor and as an artist, we're all vulnerable. I think that's when our best stuff comes out, when we get to be vulnerable. Yeah. But because I've come through it, recognizing the story helps me recognize the fact that I'm not in that place anymore.
Good.
And so I can tell this story and it be healthy,
Yeah.
And it doesn't drive me into a pit of despair. It actually makes me realize how fortunate I am.
Good. That's really good. That's fantastic. I'm excited to see it. I assume you're going to be doing it in New York sometime.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my goal.
Good.
I want to get it on stage in New York City and, come back to my old stomping grounds. I started doing theater in New York 30 years ago, and I miss it, and I'm coming back. I'm coming back with a vengeance.
Good. Yeah, thank you again for doing this.